Hi, today we're going to read Anne of Green Gables, and this is chapter 11. Anne to the rescue. Anne made up her mind to work hard in school. She wanted to be the best student in her class, but so did Gilbert Blythe. A rivalry sprang up between them. They tried to beat each other in every subject. One day Anne would be the best student, the next day it would be Gilbert. At the end of the term, Anne and Gilbert were promoted to the fifth class. They began to study new subjects. The hardest math subject for Anne to learn was geometry. It's awful stuff, Marilla, Anne said with a groan. Mr. Phillips says I am terrible at it, and Jill, I mean, some of the others are so smart at it. Even Diana. Oh, Marilla, I miss Diana so much. One snowy January evening, Anne was studying at the kitchen table. Matthew was dozing on the sofa. Marilla had gone to Charlottetown to see the premiere of Canada and really wanted to read a book, but if she stopped studying, Gilbert would beat her in geometry tomorrow. Suddenly she heard the sound of running footsteps on the icy walk outside. The door was flung open and in rushed Diana Barry. "What's happened, Diana?" cried Anne. "Has your mother forgiven me?" "Oh, Anne, come quick," Diana pleaded. "My little sister is awfully sick. She got croup, and Mother and Father are in Charlottetown. Mother hired Mary Jo to look after us while she's gone, but Mary Jo doesn't know anything about croup. Oh, Anne, I'm so scared." Without a word, Matthew got up and reached for his cap and coat. He slipped past Diana and into the yard. "He's gone to the doctor," Anne said as she put on her jacket. "But all the doctors are probably in Charlottetown," sobbed Diana. "Don't cry, Diana," Anne said. "I know exactly what to do. Don't forget, I took care of 3 pairs of Hammond twins. They had croup all the time. I'll just get some medicine. You might not have at any in your house." The girls went into the frosty night and hurried over to Diana's house. 3-year-old Minnie May was feverish. Her hoarse breathing could be heard all over the house. "First, we need lots of water," Anne said. "There, I have filled up the kettle. Mary Jo, put some woods in the stove." "It seems to me you might have thought of that before if you had any imagination. Diana, you try to find some soft clothes." Anne gave Minnie May a dose of medicine. Then she undressed the little girl and put her to bed. Anne and Diana sat with Minnie May all through the night. Anne gave her every drop of medicine in the bottle. It was 3 in the morning before Matthew arrived with the doctor. He had gone all the way to Spencerville to find one. But by now, Minnie May was much better and fast asleep. A very tired Anne went home with Matthew. It was the middle of the afternoon before Anne woke up. She dressed and went downstairs. Marilla had come home and was sitting in the kitchen knitting. "Your lunch is in the oven," she said, "and there's a plum preserve in the pantry. You must be hungry. Matthew told me about last night. Never mind talking until you have eaten." After Anne had finished her plums, Marilla said, "Mrs. Barry was here this afternoon, Anne. She wanted to see you, but I would not wake you up. She said you saved May's life. The doctor said too. Mrs. Barry is so sorry for the way she acted about the currant wine. She knows now you didn't mean to get Diana drunk. She hopes you'll forgive her and be friends with Diana again. You are to go over there this evening. Anne's face shone with happiness. Marilla, can I go right now? She asked. I'll wash the dishes when I get back. Yes, yes, run along, Marilla said, shaking her head. Anne ran out into the cold without even putting her jacket. Chapter 12. The Sleepover. Oh, Marilla, Anne said one February evening. Tomorrow is Diana's birthday. Her mother said I can spend the night in the spare room. Before that, we're going to the school concert. Oh, please say you will let me go, Marilla. Marilla finally agreed. The next night, Anne and Diana drove to the concert in a sleigh with Diana's cousin. Anne loved every performance except one. When Gilbert Blythe began his poem, Anne read a book until he finished. The girls got back to Diana's house late. Everybody seemed to be asleep. The girls tiptoed into the long parlor next to the spare room. Let's change in here, said Diana. It's nice and warm. They put on their nightgowns. Then Anne said, let's race and see who gets to the bed first. The girls ran through the parlor and through the spare room door. They jumped on the bed at the same time. Something moved under the covers. There was a gasp and a cry. A voice said, merciful goodness! Anne and Diana raced back out of the room and up the stairs. Who or what was that? Whispered Diana. It was Aunt Josephine, Diana said, laughing. She's father's aunt from Charlestown. She's 70 and very prim and proper. Well, we have to sleep with Minnie May and see cakes. Mrs. Josephine Barry did not come to breakfast the next morning. After breakfast, Anne hurried home. In the afternoon, she went to Mrs. Lindy's on an errand. So you and Diana scared poor old Miss Barry half to death last night, Miss Lynde said. Diana's mother told me that old Miss Barry has a terrible temper. She wouldn't speak to Diana at all. It wasn't Diana's fault, Anne said. It was mine. I suggested racing to see who would get into bed first. I knew it. It had to be your idea, said Mrs. Lynde. Well, it's made a lot of trouble. Miss Barry was going to stay a month, but now she's leaving tomorrow. She had promised to pay for Diana's music lessons, but she's changed her mind. The Barrys are very upset. Miss Barry is rich and they want to stay on her good side. Anne ran over to Diana's house. Diana met her at the kitchen door. I heard that Miss Barry is very angry and won't stay, Anne said. Why don't you tell her it was my fault? I could never do that, Diana said. I'm not a tattletale. Anyhow, I was just as much to blame as you. Well, I'm going to tell Miss Barry myself, Anne said. She walked up to the sitting room door and knocked. Come in, a voice said sharply. Anne entered the room. Miss Josephine Barry was sitting by the fire knitting. She glared at Anne through her gold-trimmed glasses. Who are you? Miss Barry demanded. I'm Anne of Green Gables, said Anne. I have come to confess. Confess what? Miss Barry snapped. that it was all my fault about jumping into bed on you, Anne said. It was my idea to jump into bed, so you mustn't blame Diana. Oh, I mustn't, yeah, said Miss Barry. Well, Diana did her share of jumping. It was only in fun, Anne said. I think you ought to forgive us anyway. Please forgive Diana and let her have her music lessons. If you have to be mad at someone, be mad at me. Miss Barry stopped glaring. How would you like it if you were woken up out of a sound sleep by two girls jumping on you? She asked. It must have been terrible, said Anne. But imagine how we felt, Miss Barry. We didn't know anybody was in that bed. You scared us too, and we couldn't sleep in the spare room after being promised. You're probably used to sleeping in spare rooms. But what if you were a little orphan girl who was going to sleep in a spare room for the first time? Miss Barry began to laugh. I'm afraid my imagination is a little rusty, she said. It's been so long since I used it. Now sit down and tell me all about yourself. I'm sorry, I can't, Anne said. I have to go home, but before I go, I wish you would forgive Diana and I wish you would stay. Miss Barry smiled. Maybe I will if you'll come over and talk to me. That evening, Miss Barry told Diana's parent that she had unpacked her bag. I have made up my mind to stay, she said. I want to get to know that Anne girl better. She makes me laugh. Miss Barry stayed even longer than a month, and when she finally left, she said, remember, Anne girl, when you come to town, you're to visit me. You can sleep in my very best spare room bed.